somebody gave me for Christmas a little model theatre. I'd never been to the theatre, I'd never been to the movies, anything like that. And it was just magic. And it literally transformed my life. And from then on, I just spent all through my childhood, I spent making model theatres and puppet shows, and they got more and more and more elaborate. And by the time I was 18, I had a big, very elaborate marionette show. This was in Dublin. The second half of my childhood was I was living in Dublin. I'm not Irish, but we did they had a big ball at the American Embassy. We did a show there and things like that. It was quite a big deal. But I mean, ever since I can remember, it was all I wanted to do was work in the theatre and design. How did I become involved in Death on the Nile? I was thinking about it, and I haven't the faintest idea. I cannot remember. It was directed by a wonderful producer. Not directed, it was produced by a wonderful couple, John Braben, Lord Braben, who was one of the most, again, sadly no longer with us, but I mean, who was one of the most civilised, gentlemanly people you couldn't imagine that he worked in the cinema industry. Terrible thing to say. Wonderful man, and his business partner was Richard Goodwin, and he would be in charge of the money side, and he would get the backing and the financing and the distribution and all the rest of it. And then Richard Goodwin was the nuts and bolts. He was there every day organising the running of the film. And they were a fantastic couple. I mean, it worked so. They were both wonderful people. I think Richard is probably one of the best producers I've ever worked with, because he knew how to spend money. Nothing was wasted. There were no huge limos and things. Everybody got shunted around. Everybody from top to bottom was beautifully looked after, not just the actors and the stars, but I mean, all of the crew as well. We were all beautifully looked after. If we were on location, we stayed in very nice hotels, we were beautifully fed and all the rest of it. But, there were no chauffeur-driven limos for the stars and all the rest of it. Everybody travelled in saloon cars. The money was spent where it mattered, which was on screen. He really understood how to spend money, which is a rarer quality than you would think. When we were doing Death on the Nile, most of the costumes were made beforehand, but the American actors were made in New York. A lot of them, though, were made in England by this wonderful guy called Germinal Rangel, who's half French, half Spanish, who was an amazing guy. His mother had also been a dressmaker, did the most exquisite needlework that I've ever seen. When he was 16, his uncle was the top tailor in Paris, so he did an apprenticeship with his father. So he learnt all about men's tailoring, women's tailoring, was a brilliant tailor. Then it was in the days, this must have been, I guess, in the 50s perhaps, when Christian Dior himself was still alive and working. He then went to work for Christian Dior, where he learnt women's dressmaking, so he could do anything. He was the most brilliant costume maker, and he travelled with me with his old mum, who was fantastic. So I'm sorry, this is all rather complicated, but there came a point in Egypt where I can't think what it was. I think it must have been that there was a script rewrite, and we needed another costume for Mia Farrow that wasn't in the original script. And so I sort of rummaged around, and we didn't have, I found a length of beautiful, heavy, pale blue silk jersey, and I thought there's just enough here to make a pair of sort of 1920s, 1930s big pyjama trousers for Mia. but I need something to make an amusing little top. And so I went round the hotel, I went round our workrooms, I went round everywhere that I could think to see if I could find a pair of curtains or a bedspread or some cushion covers that I could cut up and would make an amusing little top. And there was nothing. And there I was in our workroom, and there was Germinal's mum in the corner. And she was also, as well as being a brilliant dressmaker, she was a fantastic cook. And so there was always a little stove in the corner of the workroom with paella or something like that bubbling up. Fantastic cook. And by the side of the stove, I saw this filthy dirty tea towel. You know, the kind that you wash the dishes with when you dry the dishes with when you wash them. And it was filthy. I mean, it was covered in grease stains and oil and so dirty. But I could see that when it was new, it had been white with these parallel lines of very pretty, very strong colours going up and down it like that. And I thought, if we can get that back to how it started, we could just get a tiny little waistcoat top for Mia out of it. So we boiled it and boiled it and boiled it and boiled it, and we bleached it in the sun and all the rest of it. And eventually got it back to the original colours and got all the stains out. And he made this little waistcoat thing. So Mia came in for fittings, and she put on the trousers and this little waistcoat, and I have a big straw hat. And she said, "Oh, I like this." She said, "This is very pretty, and I love this little waistcoat." But she said, "Have you been eating garlic?" She said, "This is very strong, so I can smell a very strong smell of garlic." And I said, "No, I can't smell any garlic." Totally lies. And it was this wretched tea towel. And to the end of the film, we boiled it and boiled it and boiled it. Nothing would break. It still smelt of garlic until the end of shooting.
If you think I'm suffering, you're quite wrong. Actually, I'm rather enjoying myself.
Yes, your pleasure is the very worst part of it, mademoiselle.
Mia was doing a film with Robert Altman called The Wedding in Chicago. And Mia was a natural blonde. And I think there was another star in Altman's film, a woman who was very, very blonde. He didn't want two blondes. So he changed Mia's hair colour to this very, very pretty sort of coppery, strawberry blonde colour. Very, very pretty. And when I saw it, I thought, well, I like that, and that would work very well for the character she's playing in Death on the Nile, because she finished the Altman film and came straight over to England. There was I didn't have time to get it back to, her natural blonde colour. And anyhow, I loved the colour that it was, and I thought it was good for the character she's playing in the thing. So I got from the hairdresser on the Altman film, I got the recipe for the colour for the hair, gave it to our hairdresser, and on the first day's shooting, I went 8 o'clock in the morning. I went into the hairdressing room, and Mia was sitting there in front of a basin, which was full of this sort of bright olive green liquid, and they were just about to dunk her head in it, which they then did. And I thought, isn't that interesting? There's obviously some chemical reaction on hair that when it turns this green colour into this beautiful sort of red gold colour of the hair. And so they took her out and they rinsed her hair and they dried it, and there she was with bright green hair. And I said to the hairdresser, what's all this about? She said, oh, well, my hairdressing supply people said they didn't have the recipe that you gave me from America. They said this was exactly the same. And I said, well, it's not, is it? And so we couldn't shoot on her, and I had to ring Vidal Sassoon and ask him, he was in London, that was in the days when he worked from London, and ask him if he'd be kind enough to stay open late that night and try and do something, strip this dreadful green hair up and get her back to being a redhead again, which he did. But it was, my God, it was a nasty moment. It was bright green hair. She was married to Andrei Previn, I think, the conductor, I think, at the time. And they had a beautiful 16th century farmhouse in the country somewhere. And I went to do costume fittings with there as we were shooting the film. And the top floor, the sort of attic floor of this very beautiful house was all it had all been knocked into one room. It was this vast room, huge space. And all there was in it was a four-poster bed in the middle and a huge mirror at the other end. So it was perfect for doing fittings of space and light and the big mirror. And the bed was really a mess. I mean, it was just unmade bed, heaps of unmade bedclothes and people's clothes had been thrown onto it, and it was piled with all this junk. So the fitting took several hours, which we did at the end of the room in this mirror. And just as we were finishing, this pile of unmade bedclothes and what, it heaved over, and it was actually Andre Previn who'd been asleep in bed all the time. I didn't realise it was such a shock.
It is my theory that you have an obsessive love of jewelry, madame. That you coveted Madame Doyle's pearls, and that you determined to possess them even if this meant robbery or murder.
One of the things that people always ask is, when you have particularly sort of big stars, whether they have strong ideas about what they want to wear. So I called, I was rather petrified of Bette Davis because, the reputation and all the rest of it. At that time she lived in Connecticut. She had a little cottage. I called her from New York and said, it would be lovely if it was so nice if we could meet and talk about your clothes for the film. And she couldn't have been more charming. And she said, look, I know you're having to do this awful round-the-world trip. You must be exhausted. She said, whenever it's convenient for you, I will cancel anything I've got. And so I said, well, if we could meet tomorrow, that would be perfect, if that were convenient for you. And she said, yes, fine, I'll cancel whatever I've got. And I said, where's your nearest railway station in Connecticut? And she said, no, you must be very tired with all that travelling. I will send a car to New York to pick you up, which was incredibly stylish and generous of her, I thought. So the driver came, took me down there. He hung around all day. At the end of the day, because I spent the whole day with her, at the end of the day, he drove me back to New York, and I'd put some money in an envelope as a tip, and I said, look, thank you so much. I'm sorry you had to wait around all day, but please have a drink on me. And he said, no, Miss Davis said that under no circumstances was I to accept any money from you. And I thought that was so stylish and generous. I thought, anyhow, we got to the cottage in the morning, and it wasn't film starry at all. It was pretty. It was a 2-story, very simple, very, very pretty little cottage in the middle of a wood, stream running through the grounds. It was very, very, very pretty indeed. All the windows were open. As I went down the path, I could smell coffee being brewed and cookies having been baked. You could smell it from as I walked down the path. Rang the front doorbell. She answered the door. And she'd obviously gone to a lot of trouble to put herself together to meet me. She was wearing a very nice dress, the wig, which she always wore wigs. The wig was beautifully done, all the rest of it. And it was very flattering, that she'd gone to all that trouble to make a good impression. And she said, right, okay. She said, you better see what the problems are. And she got the dress and she went, chung, like that. And there was this 70-year-old woman that I'd only met 10 minutes before, stark naked in the middle of the floor. And she was absolutely right, because then you could see what the good points were and there was nothing terrible, but I mean, there were some things that you could celebrate and other things that you could draw a discreet veil over. And the thing that I saw straight away was that she had these beautiful shoulders. So I thought, right, well, we're going to have lots of that showing. And then she had these exquisite, tiny, tiny, tiny feet and beautiful ankles with these tiny feet, I mean, she must have taken something like a 1.5 shoe. Tiny little feet. So I thought, OK, we're going to concentrate on the top and the bottom, and then we'll just draw a veil over the middle bit, which is what we did. And so I made some shoes for her, which were beautifully made in London. Now, I realise it's very politically incorrect, of python skin, which has those tiny little markings on. But because she had such tiny feet, I could only use the tail end of the python skin, because the pattern was only small enough right at the end of the tail. And it actually took, I blush to tell you this because it's so terrible, but it took 16 skins for this one pair of very tiny shoes for Bette Davis. But then she sat down and she'd got 4 foolscap typed pages. The only other person there was an elderly woman who was her sort of secretary and companion and hairdresser called Peggy, who never spoke. It was a bit like Dame Edna Everage. What was her stooge called? Who sat in the corner and never uttered. It doesn't matter anyhow. But Peggy was there, never spoke. She was the only other person there. And Miss Davis read these 4 typed pages of what she was going to wear in the film. And they were the most terrible, terrible, terrible ideas. They were wrong for the period, they were wrong for the character, they were just awful. And I had very strong ideas about the way that I wanted to look, and I thought it's not going to work for the film. It's not going to work for the film. And what can I do? This is a very difficult situation because the director and the producer are not going to meet her until she actually shoots on the set. It's just me. And then she said, a couple of years ago I was going to do a musical in New York, and she said I had the best wig maker in New York to make this wig for me that was never used. So Peggy here has dressed it in the style that I shall wear it in the film. So they went upstairs, and eventually I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and it was a disaster. It was sort of halfway between Shirley Temple and Mary Pickford. It was a blonde wig with curls, ringlets, curls up the back. And I thought, well, this is the moment when the battle is lost, or I've got to be a big grown-up person. And I've got to solve this problem somehow because this is crunch time. And so I said, Miss Davis, I think you're absolutely right. It's a beautifully made wig and I love the colour and it will work very, very well for the film. But could you just come over to this mirror? And I said, now what you're looking at is one of the world's most iconic faces. It's a face that everybody in the world recognises. And I said, why is that? I said, it's those wonderful deep-set eyes, it's those marvellous cheekbones, it's that wonderful jawline. And I said, at the moment, I can't see any of those. All I can see is just masses and masses and masses of, I can't see the face. All I can see are the blonde curls. And I said, have you got a comb? And she said, Peggy, have you got to give him a comb? And I'm not a hairdresser, so with trembling fingers, I started combing out all these. And I said, if we lose all of these curls here, and we just have a big sweep of hair that defines the eye socket, and then we get rid of all these curls here, and we just have another big movement that defines the cheekbones, and then if we get rid of all of these curls at the back, I said, can you turn so you can see yourself in profile? Get rid of all these curls at the back so that you have a flat back to your head which carries on the line of the jaw in a straight line up to the top of the head. And she looked at herself in the mirror and she said, Peggy, you know what? This kid knows what he's doing. Why don't we just leave the whole thing to him?
Well, rules are made to be broken. At least mine are, by me.
The other thing that she said was, in her list of 4 pages, she said, all my career, designers have put me in hats. So she said, I don't wear any hats in Death on the Nile at all. No hats. She said, if we're on deck and it's windy, maybe just a little sort of chiffon headscarf or something so that my hair doesn't get messed up. I wanted to, I'd had this idea for these great big black hats that I wanted to put her in all the way through. So anyhow, when she left the whole thing to me, I put her in big black hats all the way through. And at the end of the film, there's a photograph that she gave me, and it's very amusing and very generous. And she said, Tony, she said, I shall never be able to perform again without one of your beautiful big black hats. And I was so touching,